The dusty main street of Silver Creek stretched like a scar across the Texas plains, baked hard under the relentless summer sun of 1887. Samuel Garrett adjusted his black hat as he stepped down from his polished carriage, his boots clicking against the wooden boardwalk. At 52, he was one of the wealthiest cattle ranchers in 3 counties, his empire built on thousands of acres and tens of thousands of longhorn cattle. Yet for all his success, there remained one thing his money could not buy: an heir to carry on the Garrett name. His wife Margaret had been buried 5 years now, taken by consumption before she could give him the son he desperately needed. The doctors in Dallas had made it clear that his advanced age and a childhood bout with scarlet fever had left him unable to father children naturally. But Samuel Garrett was not a man to accept defeat, even from nature itself. He paused outside the modest wooden house on Elm Street, studying the peeling white paint and the small garden where tomatoes and beans grew in neat rows. This was where Clara Henderson lived, the young widow who had caught his attention at church. She was 28, still in the prime of her childbearing years, with auburn hair and green eyes that spoke of Irish heritage. More importantly, she was desperate. Clara's husband had been killed in a mining accident 6 months ago, leaving her with nothing but debts and a small house that the bank threatened to seize. Samuel had made discreet inquiries through his lawyer, learning that she owed nearly $300 to various creditors around town. It was a fortune to her, but pocket change to him. The arrangement he had in mind was unconventional, perhaps even scandalous by the standards of proper society. But Samuel had long ago learned that money could overcome most moral objections, especially when desperation was involved. He would pay Clara to carry his child, conceived through the modern medical procedures he had researched extensively in San Francisco. The doctors there had assured him it was possible, though expensive and requiring the utmost discretion. Samuel knocked on the door, removing his hat as footsteps approached from within. Clara opened it, her face showing surprise at seeing the prominent rancher on her doorstep. She wore a simple blue dress, mended in several places but clean and pressed. Her hands bore the calluses of hard work, and dark circles under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights spent worrying about her future. "Mr. Garrett," she said, offering a small curtsy, "what brings you to my humble home? Mrs. Henderson, I hope you will forgive the intrusion. I have a business proposition that may be of mutual benefit to both of us. May I come in?" Clara hesitated, glancing nervously at the neighbors who might be watching. A woman alone receiving male visitors was the subject of gossip in a town like Silver Creek. But Samuel Garrett was not just any man, and refusing him could have consequences she could not afford. "Of course, please come in," she said, stepping aside to let him enter. The interior of the house was sparse but tidy. A small parlor contained 2 worn chairs and a table that had seen better days. The walls were bare except for a single photograph of Clara with her late husband, both looking younger and more hopeful than the present reality suggested. Samuel took the offered chair, placing his hat on his knee. He studied Clara as she sat across from him, noting the way she kept her hands folded to hide their trembling. She knew she was in a precarious position, and that knowledge would work in his favor. "Mrs. Henderson, I will speak plainly because I believe you appreciate honesty over false pleasantries. I am aware of your financial difficulties, and I am prepared to offer you a solution that would eliminate your debts and provide for your future security." Clara's eyes widened slightly, but she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I need an heir. Mrs. Henderson, my late wife was unable to provide me with children, and at my age, remarriage seems unlikely to solve this problem. However, modern medicine has provided alternatives that were not available to previous generations. I am proposing that you bear a child for me, using methods that would not require any impropriety between us personally." The color drained from Clara's face as she absorbed his words. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, clearly struggling to process what he had suggested. "I would pay all your debts immediately," Samuel continued, "and provide you with a substantial sum for your services. You would want for nothing during the pregnancy, and afterward, you would be free to start a new life wherever you choose, with enough money to ensure your comfort for years to come." Clara finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Mr. Garrett, what you are suggesting, it is not natural. It goes against everything the church teaches about family and marriage." Samuel leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on a gentler tone. "Mrs. Henderson, I understand your reservations, but consider your alternatives. The bank will seize this house within the month. Your creditors grow more impatient each day. Without my offer, what future do you have? You are young and capable, but this town offers few opportunities for a woman in your position. The truth of his words hung heavy in the air between them. Clara looked around her modest parlour, perhaps calculating how many of her possessions she would lose when the creditors came calling. Her husband's photograph seemed to stare back at her from the wall, a reminder of dreams that had died with him in that mine shaft. How much? She asked quietly. $2,000, paid in 3 installments. $500 now to settle your immediate debts. $500 upon confirmation of pregnancy, and $1,000 upon successful delivery of a healthy child. Clara's sharp intake of breath was audible. $2,000 was more money than she had ever imagined possessing. It was enough to buy a new house, start a business, or travel east to the cities where a woman might find respectable employment. "I need time to consider this," she said finally. Samuel nodded, rising from his chair. "Of course, but do not take too long, Mrs. Henderson. Opportunities like this do not present themselves often, and my patience, while considerable, is not infinite." As he placed his hat back on his head and moved toward the door, he turned back to face her one last time. "I will return tomorrow evening for your answer. I trust you will give my proposal the serious consideration it deserves." After he left, Clara sat alone in her parlour as the shadows lengthened across the floor. Outside, she could hear the sounds of Silver Creek settling into evening. Horses clip-clopping down the main street, children being called in for supper, the distant whistle of the evening train. It was the same routine that had played out every day since her husband's death, a routine that would soon be interrupted by creditors and eviction notices if she did nothing. She looked again at her husband's photograph, wondering what he would think of Samuel Garrett's proposition. Would he understand that desperation sometimes forced choices that love alone could never justify? Or would he turn away in shame at what his widow was considering? As darkness fell over Silver Creek, Clara Henderson faced the most difficult decision of her life, knowing that whatever choice she made would change her forever. Clara Henderson barely slept that night, tossing restlessly on her narrow bed as Samuel Garrett's words echoed in her mind. $2,000. The sum seemed impossible, like something from a fairy tale rather than a real possibility. She had risen before dawn, as was her habit, and now sat at her small kitchen table with a cup of weak coffee, watching the sun paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. The morning brought no relief from her turmoil. Every object in her modest home seemed to mock her with reminders of her desperate situation. The kitchen pump that had been leaking for months, requiring a bucket to catch the drips because she could not afford a plumber. The torn curtains she had mended so many times that the fabric could barely hold another stitch. The pantry that grew emptier each day, forcing her to stretch meals with water and hope. By mid-morning, she had made her decision, not because she wanted to, but because she had no choice. The alternative was destitution, and Clara had seen what happened to destitute women in towns like Silver Creek. They became objects of pity at best, outcasts at worst. Some turned to unspeakable professions just to survive, while others simply disappeared, drifting from town to town until poverty and despair claimed them entirely. At least Samuel Garrett's proposition offered dignity alongside desperation. She would be providing a service, earning her payment through sacrifice rather than begging for charity. The child would be wanted, loved, and provided for in ways she could never manage alone. Perhaps there was even a kind of nobility in it, giving life to someone who would inherit vast lands and opportunity. The sound of horses approaching interrupted her thoughts. Through her front window, she saw Sheriff Tom Bradley dismounting from his bay gelding, his weathered face grim with purpose. Behind him rode 2 other men she recognized as employees of the Silver Creek Bank. Her heart sank as she realized why they had come. "Mrs. Henderson," Sheriff Bradley called out, removing his hat as she opened the door. "I am sorry to disturb you so early, but I have some official business that cannot wait." Clara stepped onto her small porch, wrapping her arms around herself despite the growing warmth of the morning. "What can I do for you, Sheriff?" "I am afraid I have papers to serve you, ma'am. The bank has filed for immediate seizure of this property due to outstanding debts. You have until the end of the week to vacate the premises." The words hit her like a physical blow, even though she had been expecting them. The end of the week, 4 days to pack up the remnants of her life and find somewhere else to go. 4 days before she would be homeless and penniless. with nowhere to turn except the charity of a church that was already stretched thin, caring for other unfortunates. I understand. Sheriff, she managed to say, accepting the legal documents with hands that trembled only slightly. Thank you for your courtesy in delivering them personally. Sheriff Bradley studied her face with the kind of concern that came from years of delivering bad news to good people. Mrs. Henderson, if there is anything I can do to help, any family you might stay with, I will manage, Sheriff. Thank you. After the men had ridden away, Clara stood alone on her porch, holding the eviction papers that made her decision final. Samuel Garrett had not simply offered her money, he had offered her salvation. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Perhaps he had known about the bank's plans, had even encouraged them to force her hand. It did not matter now. What mattered was survival. She spent the afternoon walking through Silver Creek, observing the town with new eyes. The general store where she could no longer afford to shop. The dress shop where she had once bought fabric for curtains and clothes, back when her husband's wages could stretch to such luxuries. The church where she had been married, where she had prayed for guidance that seemed slow in coming. At the schoolhouse, she paused to watch children playing during their afternoon recess. Their laughter carried on the warm breeze, a sound of innocence and joy that seemed to come from another world. Would the child she carried for Samuel Garrett laugh like that someday? Would it grow up healthy and happy on the vast Garrett ranch, surrounded by opportunity and privilege? The thought brought an unexpected comfort. Whatever moral compromises she was making, the result would be a life given every advantage. Her sacrifice would create something beautiful and worthwhile, even if she would not be there to see it grow to adulthood. As evening approached, Clara returned home to prepare for Samuel's visit. She changed into her best dress, a dark green wool that had been her wedding dress, altered and dyed to suit her widowhood. She arranged her hair carefully and set out her finest teacup, the one piece of her grandmother's china that she had not yet been forced to sell. Samuel arrived precisely at 7 o'clock, as punctual as she had expected. He entered her parlor with the same commanding presence as before, but this time Clara detected something different in his manner. A tension, perhaps even anxiety, that suggested her answer mattered more to him than he had let on. Mrs. Henderson, he said, settling into the same chair he had occupied the night before. I trust you have given my proposal the consideration it deserves. I have. Mr. Garrett, Clara's voice was steady, betraying none of the emotional turmoil that had consumed her for the past 24 hours. I accept your offer. Samuel's relief was visible, though he tried to hide it behind his businessman's facade. Excellent. I believe this arrangement will benefit us both considerably. Now, there are practical matters we must discuss. He reached into his coat and withdrew a leather portfolio, from which he produced several documents written in the precise hand of a professional scribe. I have had my lawyer prepare a contract that outlines our agreement in detail. You will find the terms exactly as I described them yesterday, with additional provisions for your care during the pregnancy. Clara accepted the papers, scanning the dense legal language that formalized what felt like the sale of her very soul. The monetary amounts were clearly stated, as were the expectations and obligations of both parties. It was all very proper and businesslike, as if they were negotiating the purchase of cattle rather than the creation of human life. The medical procedures will take place in San Francisco, Samuel continued. I have made arrangements with a physician there who specializes in such matters. We will travel there within the month, and you will remain under medical supervision until the pregnancy is confirmed. All expenses will be covered naturally. And afterward, Clara asked, after the child is born, you will be free to go wherever you choose, with a final payment and a letter of reference should you need employment. The child will remain with me, of course, to be raised as my heir. There will be no contact between you after the birth, no claims on your part to custody or visitation. In the eyes of the law and society, you will have no connection to the child whatsoever. The finality of his words struck her like a cold wind. She had understood this intellectually, but hearing it stated so plainly made the reality undeniable. She would carry a child for 9 months, feel it move within her, give birth to it, and then walk away forever as if it had never existed. The money would compensate her financially, but no amount could prepare her emotionally for such a separation. I understand, she said quietly. Samuel produced a leather bag from his coat, heavy with coins that clinked softly as he placed it on her table. $500 as promised. This should be sufficient to settle your immediate debts and prepare for our journey west. Clara stared at the bag, more money than she had ever seen in one place. It represented freedom from the crushing weight of debt that had consumed her life since her husband's death. It also represented the first step down a path from which there would be no return. "There is one more matter," Samuel said, his voice taking on a more personal tone. "I want you to understand that I do not take this arrangement lightly. I am not a man given to sentiment, but I recognize the sacrifice you are making. I will ensure that you are treated with respect and dignity throughout this process. You have my word on that." Clara met his eyes for the first time since accepting his offer. In them, she saw something she had not expected: genuine gratitude, perhaps even a glimmer of the loneliness that had driven him to such an unconventional solution to his need for an heir. "Thank you, Mr. Garrett. I appreciate your consideration." As he prepared to leave, Samuel paused at the door. "We will depart for San Francisco in 2 weeks. I suggest you use that time to settle your affairs here and prepare for an extended absence. When you return to Texas, it will be to begin a new life entirely." After he left, Clara sat alone with the bag of money, feeling its weight in her hands. Outside, Silver Creek continued its evening routine, unaware that one of its residents had just made a bargain that would change everything. She had chosen survival over sentiment, practicality over principle. Whether she had chosen wisely remained to be seen. The transcontinental railroad stretched across the American landscape like an iron spine, carrying Clara Henderson and Samuel Garrett westward toward San Francisco and a future neither could fully predict. They had been traveling for 3 days, their private compartment a small island of luxury amid the general chaos of the passenger cars. Clara pressed her face to the window, watching the endless plains of Kansas give way to the rugged terrain of Colorado, mountains rising like ancient sentinels against the pale blue sky. The journey had been arranged with Samuel's characteristic attention to detail. They traveled as Mr. and Mrs. Samuel Morrison, a fiction supported by carefully forged documents and matching wedding rings. To the other passengers and railroad staff, they appeared to be a prosperous rancher and his young wife taking an extended honeymoon trip to California. Clara had been coached in the details of their assumed identities, practicing her responses until they felt natural on her tongue. "We will be in Denver by evening," Samuel said, consulting his pocket watch. He had spoken little during the journey, spending most of his time reading newspapers or reviewing business correspondence. When he did speak, it was with the polite formality of a stranger, maintaining the distance between them despite their intimate arrangement. Clara nodded, smoothing the fabric of her traveling dress. Samuel had insisted she purchase a new wardrobe before their departure, clothing befitting the wife of a wealthy man. The dresses were finer than anything she had ever owned, made of silk and wool in colors that complemented her auburn hair. She felt like an actress playing a role, which in many ways she was. "Tell me about the doctor we will see," she said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "What manner of man is he?" Samuel folded his newspaper and regarded her with the measured gaze she had come to recognize. "Dr. Harrison Williams is a graduate of Harvard Medical College, trained in the latest European techniques. He has established a private practice in San Francisco, serving clients who require discretion along with medical expertise. I have corresponded with him extensively, and I am confident in his abilities." The clinical nature of his description did little to ease Clara's growing anxiety about what lay ahead. The medical procedure Samuel had described sounded more like something from a science fiction novel than reality. Yet she had read enough to know that such things were indeed possible, pioneered by physicians in the great cities of the East and West, where money could purchase access to the most advanced treatments. "And he has performed such procedures before?" she asked. "Several times, with great success. The technique involves the careful transfer of genetic material, using specialized medical instruments. It is entirely safe and requires no physical contact between the parties involved. You have my word that your virtue will remain intact throughout the process." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks at the frank discussion of such intimate matters. Even between husband and wife, such topics were rarely spoken of directly. Yet here she was, discussing the mechanics of conception with a man who was essentially a stranger, as casually as they might debate the weather. The train began its descent into Denver as evening approached, the city spreading below them in a carpet of lights and smoke. Coal fires burned in countless homes and businesses, creating a haze that softened the sharp edges of buildings and streets. It was larger than Silver Creek by many times, a testament to the rapid growth that railroad connections had brought to the Western Territories. They disembarked for a brief stop, Samuel explaining that they would change trains here for the final leg of their journey to California. The Denver depot was a hive of activity even at the late hour, with passengers boarding and disembarking, cargo being loaded and unloaded, and vendors selling everything from newspapers to hot meals. Clara walked beside Samuel along the platform, noting how naturally he assumed the role of protective husband. His hand rested lightly on her elbow as they navigated through the crowd, and he spoke to porters and conductors with the easy authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. She found herself wondering what their arrangement might have been like under different circumstances, if they had met as equals, rather than as parties to a business transaction. "Mrs. Morrison," Samuel said as they waited for their connecting train, "I want you to know that I appreciate the courage this journey requires. Many women would not have the strength to undertake what you are doing." It was the most personal thing he had said since their agreement began, and Clara was surprised by the warmth in his voice. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. I find that necessity provides strength we never knew we possessed." Their new train was even more luxurious than the first, fitted with polished wood paneling and brass fixtures that gleamed in the gaslight. Their compartment contained a small sitting area and separate sleeping berths, maintaining the proprieties even within their fictional marriage. Samuel had thought of everything, down to the smallest details that would make their deception believable. As they settled in for the night, Clara found herself thinking about the life she had left behind in Silver Creek. By now, her few remaining possessions would have been removed from the house, her debts settled with Samuel's money. The neighbors would be wondering what had become of the quiet widow who had disappeared so suddenly. Perhaps they assumed she had gone to live with relatives in another state, a common enough occurrence for women in her situation. She had written no farewell letters, made no promises to return. That chapter of her life was closed forever. Whether she succeeded in Samuel's plan or failed, there would be no going back to the person she had been, the woman who had married for love and believed in simple happiness. That innocence had died with her husband in the mine, buried alongside dreams of children and growing old together. The train rolled through the night, carrying them across the Continental Divide and into the unknown territories of Utah and Nevada. Clara lay in her narrow berth, listening to the rhythmic clacking of wheels on rails and the distant sound of the locomotive's whistle. Somewhere in the darkness outside, coyotes howled at the moon, their voices wild and free in a way she envied. When morning came, they were traveling through desert country, vast expanses of sand and rock broken by strange formations that looked like ancient castles or sleeping giants. The landscape was alien to Clara's eyes, accustomed as she was to the green plains and rolling hills of Texas. This was a harder country, beautiful in its own way, but unforgiving to those who underestimated its challenges. "We should reach Sacramento by evening," Samuel informed her over breakfast in the dining car. "From there, it is only a short journey to San Francisco. Dr. Williams is expecting us tomorrow afternoon." Clara nodded, cutting her eggs with more precision than necessary. The closer they came to their destination, the more real the entire arrangement became. Soon, there would be no more pretending, no more comfortable distance between intention and action. She would submit to medical procedures that would result in pregnancy, carrying a child she would never raise, for money she desperately needed. "Are you having second thoughts?" Samuel asked quietly, perhaps reading the tension in her posture. "No," Clara replied without hesitation. "I gave you my word, Mr. Garrett. I intend to honor it." "Samuel," he corrected gently. "If we are to spend the next several months together, perhaps we might dispense with some formalities. You may call me Samuel, very well, and you may call me Clara if you wish." It was a small concession to intimacy, but it felt significant nonetheless. They were bound together now by more than money and legal contracts. Whatever happened in San Francisco would create a connection between them that could never be entirely severed, no matter how far apart their lives might diverge afterward. The train continued westward through the afternoon, climbing into the Sierra Nevada mountains where snow still capped the highest peaks, despite the summer season. The engineering required to build a railroad through such terrain was staggering, with bridges spanning impossible chasms and tunnels bored through solid rock. It was a testament to human determination and ingenuity. the kind of achievement that characterized this rapidly changing era. As evening fell, the lights of Sacramento appeared in the valley below, marking their approach to California and the final phase of their journey. Tomorrow would bring them to San Francisco and Dr. Williams, where Clara would take the irrevocable step that would transform her from desperate widow to something else entirely. She was not sure what that something would be, but she was determined to face it with dignity and courage. The die was cast, the journey begun. Whatever lay ahead, there could be no turning back now. San Francisco rose from the Pacific coast like a city built on dreams and determination. Its steep hills crowned with elegant Victorian houses that seemed to defy gravity itself. Clara stood at the window of their hotel suite, watching the morning fog roll in from the bay while cable cars climbed the impossible slopes with mechanical precision. The city was unlike anything she had ever seen, a testament to the wealth that gold and commerce had brought to California in just a few short decades. Dr. Harrison Williams maintained his practice in a respectable brick building on Nob Hill, far removed from the rougher districts near the waterfront where sailors and miners sought their entertainment. Samuel had escorted Clara there the previous afternoon for an initial consultation, during which the physician had explained the procedure with clinical detachment that somehow made the entire arrangement seem less extraordinary. The process is quite straightforward, Dr. Williams had assured them, his cultured Boston accent lending authority to his words. I have perfected the technique over several years of practice, and I am confident of success. The key is timing, which requires Mrs. Morrison to remain here for approximately 2 weeks while we monitor her natural cycles. Now, 3 days later, Clara found herself in the doctor's examination room, wearing a hospital gown and trying to maintain her composure as a nurse prepared the necessary instruments. The room was spotlessly clean, with white walls and gleaming medical equipment that spoke of modern scientific advancement. Electric lights replaced the gas fixtures found in most buildings, casting a bright, steady glow that eliminated shadows. Please try to relax, Mrs. Morrison, Dr. Williams said as he entered the room, followed by Samuel, who looked as uncomfortable as Clara felt. The procedure itself takes only a few minutes, and there should be minimal discomfort. Clara closed her eyes and tried to think of other things as the doctor began his work. She imagined herself back in Silver Creek, working in her small garden on a spring morning when the air was fresh and full of promise. She thought of her late husband, wondering what he would make of this strange turn her life had taken. Would he understand that desperation had driven her to choices love never could have justified? The procedure was indeed brief, conducted with professional efficiency that left no room for embarrassment or second thoughts. When it was finished, Dr. Williams instructed her to remain still for 30 minutes while the nurse monitored her condition. Samuel sat in a chair nearby, reading a medical journal with apparent fascination, though Clara suspected he was as nervous as she was about whether their plan would succeed. How will we know if it has worked? Clara asked the doctor as she was finally allowed to sit up. We will know with certainty within 2 weeks, Dr. Williams replied, washing his hands at a marble basin. In the meantime, you should rest, eat well, and avoid any strenuous activity. I will examine you every few days to monitor your progress. They returned to their hotel, where Samuel had arranged for a suite with separate bedrooms and a common sitting area overlooking the bay. The accommodations were luxurious beyond anything Clara had experienced, with Persian carpets and furniture that had clearly been imported from the finest manufacturers in the East. Room service provided their meals, allowing them to maintain privacy while they waited for the results of Dr. Williams' work. The days passed slowly, filled with awkward conversations and long silences as they both struggled with the intimacy of their situation, despite the clinical nature of what had brought them together. Samuel proved to be more thoughtful than Clara had expected, bringing her books from the hotel's library and arranging for a seamstress to visit when Clara mentioned that her dresses were becoming uncomfortable. You seem different here, Clara observed one evening as they shared dinner in their sitting room. More relaxed than you were in Texas. Samuel considered this as he cut his beef with precise movements. Perhaps it is being away from the expectations of home. In Silver Creek, I am Samuel Garrett, the cattle baron, with a reputation to maintain and business interests that demand constant attention. Here, I am simply a man hoping for a child. Do you ever regret not remarrying after your wife died? It would have been the conventional solution to your need for an heir. I considered it, Samuel admitted, but I could not bring myself to make promises I knew I could not keep. Margaret and I had a true partnership, built on mutual respect and genuine affection. I have met no woman since her death who could inspire such feelings again. It seemed unfair to marry for practical reasons alone when the woman deserved better. Clara found herself surprised by his honesty. She had assumed that wealthy men like Samuel Garrett took what they wanted without much consideration for the feelings of others. Yet here was evidence of a conscience, perhaps even a romantic heart hidden beneath his businessman's exterior. "Tell me about your marriage," Samuel said suddenly. "What was your husband like?" The question caught Clara off guard. They had maintained such careful distance from personal topics that his interest in her past seemed almost shocking. "James was a good man," she said finally. "Kind, hard-working, full of dreams about the future we would build together. He wanted children very much. We had been trying for 3 years when the mine accident happened." "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you. Sometimes I wonder what our children would have been like had we been blessed with them. What hopes they might have fulfilled. What contributions they might have made to the world." The irony of her words hung between them. She was now carrying the child that James had never been able to give her, but for another man's hopes and dreams rather than their own. The baby growing within her would inherit vast wealth and opportunity, advantages that her children with James could never have known. A week after the procedure, Dr. Williams confirmed what they had both suspected but hardly dared hope. The treatment had been successful. Clara was pregnant with Samuel Garrett's child, conceived through the miracles of modern medicine in a sterile room far from home. The knowledge brought a mixture of relief and trepidation that left her emotionally exhausted. "Excellent news," Samuel said when they returned to the hotel, though his satisfaction seemed tempered by something Clara could not identify. "Dr. Williams believes you should remain in San Francisco for another month to ensure the pregnancy is progressing normally. After that, we can return to Texas. And then we wait. You will live at my ranch during the pregnancy, where I can ensure you receive the best possible care. I have already arranged for a room to be prepared, separate from the main house to preserve your privacy and reputation." Clara nodded. Though the thought of spending months on Samuel's ranch filled her with uncertainty. She would be living as his ward, dependent on his generosity, but with no real place in his world. Neither wife nor servant, neither family nor stranger, but something in between that had no name or precedent. That night, as she lay in her hotel bed listening to the sounds of the city below, Clara placed her hand on her still flat stomach and tried to comprehend that a new life was beginning there. In 9 months, she would give birth to a child that would never know her as its mother, would never hear the stories of her own childhood, or learn the songs her grandmother had taught her. The money Samuel paid her would provide security and freedom, but it could not fill the emptiness that such a separation would create. She had agreed to bear a child, but she was beginning to understand that she was also agreeing to bear a loss that no amount of gold could compensate. Outside her window, San Francisco slept beneath a blanket of fog, its dreams as hidden and mysterious as the future that awaited them all. The die had been cast, the child conceived, and now there was nothing left but to wait and see what consequences their unusual arrangement would bring. In the room next door, Samuel Garrett lay awake as well, staring at the ceiling and wondering if he had made a terrible mistake. He had gotten what he wanted, an heir to carry on his name and inherit his empire, but the cost was proving higher than he had anticipated, measured not in dollars, but in the growing complexity of feelings he had not expected to develop for the woman who carried his child. The next 6 months would test them both in ways neither had foreseen, as the simple business arrangement they had agreed to became something far more complicated and emotionally dangerous. The child growing within Clara would bind them together in ways that legal contracts could never define, creating connections that money alone could never sever. 9 months had passed since that fateful day in Dr. Williams's San Francisco office, and Clara Henderson now lived in comfortable quarters on the Garrett ranch, her pregnancy having progressed without complication under the watchful care of the local physician. The small cottage Samuel had prepared for her sat nestled among cottonwood trees near a creek that provided both privacy and the soothing sound of running water. As her time approached, she found herself torn between anticipation and dread. Knowing that birth would bring both life and an ending, she was not prepared to face. The labor began on a crisp October morning, announced by the familiar tightening in her back that the doctor had warned her to expect. Samuel had arranged for the finest midwife in 3 counties, a capable woman named Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, who had delivered hundreds of babies over her 30-year career. Dr. Morrison from town was also summoned, creating a level of medical attention that few women in rural Texas could ever hope to receive. Samuel paced in the main house, wearing a path in the Persian carpet of his study as he waited for news. He had insisted on being present during the labor, despite Mrs. Whitman's protests that childbirth was women's work and no place for men. But this was his child, his heir, and he would not be banished to wait in ignorance while his future was decided in the cottage by the creek. The labor lasted 14 hours, a grueling ordeal that tested Clara's strength and resolve to their limits. She had expected pain, but nothing had prepared her for the all-consuming intensity of bringing life into the world. Mrs. Whitman proved to be a steady presence, offering encouragement and practical advice while Dr. Morrison monitored both mother and child with professional attention. "I can see the head," Mrs. Whitman announced as the final stage began. "Just a few more pushes, dear. Your baby is almost here." Clara bore down with what felt like the last of her strength, driven by instincts older than civilization itself. The room seemed to fade around her, reduced to nothing but the elemental struggle between her body and the child demanding to be born. Time lost all meaning as she fought to complete the task that would fulfill her agreement with Samuel and forever change both their lives. Finally, with a rush of fluid and relief that left her gasping, the baby emerged into the world. Mrs. Whitman caught the small form with practiced hands, quickly clearing the airways and stimulating the first cry that announced successful birth. The sound filled the cottage like a declaration of victory, proof that life had triumphed despite all the unconventional circumstances of its creation. "A beautiful, healthy baby," Mrs. Whitman proclaimed, wrapping the infant in clean linens. "Perfect in every way." Clara struggled to sit up, desperate to see the child she had carried for 9 months. The midwife hesitated for just a moment, exchanging a meaningful,